Hey, Rick. So, I'm taking you where?
Rob Benchley's house, which is off Sankaty Ave.
Is he Rob Benchley from Jaws?
It's his cousin. His cousin wrote Jaws.
His cousin wrote it.
Yeah, his cousin Peter, who unfortunately passed away a while back.
Yep, right, Peter Benchley. Exactly.
Rob tells. I remember when, I guess it was 1976 when that movie came out, and Rob worked at the Moby Dick Inn, which is now the Summer House. And so I've known him. I met Rob in probably 1971 or something. But he tells a story about going down to the Steamship Authority to put his car on, and there was no room. It was 4th of July weekend or something. And the lady said, what's your name? Put you on standby. And he said, Rob Benchley. And she looks at the woman next to her and goes, Jaws. And they put him right on.
I'm sure that happened quite often to him.
Yeah.
I mean, that was anyway, so you are a lacrosse fanatic. Would you say that? Is it your passion?
Yeah, it's something it did a lot for me growing up. I grew up in Baltimore City, and that was one of the places back in the 1870s, when a barnstorming group of North American Native Americans from Canada came down through the eastern seaboard on several occasions putting on lacrosse exhibitions. And the sport really caught on in certain places. Baltimore's always kind of been, if you've ever been there, it's a real sort of eccentric city. And some of these intellectual types at University of Maryland and so on had teams. And this is by the late 1880s. And so I grew up about 4 blocks from Johns Hopkins, and the neighborhood I grew up in, it was like you just thought everybody played lacrosse everywhere in the country because everybody there did.
Interesting.
And so when I was a little kid, you'd see everybody. Back then, the sticks were all wooden, and everybody had a stick in their hand starting in March. And then in the summer, we'd play baseball, but in the spring, it was all lacrosse. There were, and they still are within literally an area that's, the size of Nantucket town. There are probably 4 or 5 of the top 20 teams in the country, high school teams, in any given year are within that radius.
And that was what year?
I was born in 55. The first game I ever saw, I don't remember it.
So 60s, basically.
The 60s.
Does it surprise you that lacrosse, it took so long for lacrosse to get to where it is right now?
The big difference, Gino, and I think we mentioned this during one of the game telecasts, is that I guess it was 68 or 69, a guy by the name of Crawford, I think, got the first synthetic stick patent. And prior to that, there were only a certain number of sticks made every year, and that was a limiting factor in itself to the spread of the sport. Once the synthetic stick came along,
interesting.
Every stick, suddenly. Now the first synthetic sticks were pretty rudimentary, and they were still with the wooden stick. Each stick is kind of idiosyncratic, and it takes with leather and catgut. You'd have to break them in, and it would take you. For one thing, you had to get a good stick, and the college teams scooped up most of the good sticks from the dealers. So you had to find a good stick because each one had a kind of slightly different shape, and then you'd have to break it in, which would take weeks, if not months. And then if it snowed or was muddy, or if somebody stepped on your stick and broke it, it could foul up your whole season.
Oh, okay.
When the plastic stick came along, all of a sudden, you could buy 2 plastic sticks at the start of the year, have somebody string them for you the way you like them, and then when one broke, you just picked up the next one.
And you think that really is that's the key to why so many kids play lacrosse now?
The modern game would not have happened the way it has if it was still all wooden sticks, I can tell you that much. Also, it was also kind of the province of prep schools, and it was thought of as, basically a white man's country club sport. Starting in the 1960s, there was a guy by the name of Howdy Myers, who was a coach at St. Paul's School in Baltimore, and I think he actually went to Friends, where I went. might be mistaken, but I think he did. Anyway, he was at St. Paul's school, and they were so good they never lost. Hopkins hired him. Now, Hopkins is a perennial powerhouse, and he, won multiple championships there. He retired and went up to Long Island, and he took his passion for the game to Long Island. And next thing you know, all these public schools in Long Island, and that was some of the public schools in Baltimore played it, but when it went to Long Island, and next thing you know, there's like 150 or more Long Island public schools playing it, and what happens with anything, but so let's say a guy who plays for the Naval Academy, a real good program, gets out of the Naval Academy and gets stationed out in San Diego. And he has a few teammates out there. He played lacrosse for Navy. Next thing you know, they're playing lacrosse out in San Diego. And it's kind of been like that all.
Right.
And it just kind of reached, as they say, a tipping point where there were enough teams being played, like Colorado, Texas, California, and it all happened around the same time. When I was a senior in high school, there were something like 200 teams in the high school teams in the country.
Yeah.
Today there are, I think they might be even closing in on 4,000.
Yeah.
There's
exactly.
well over 3.
Wow. So, when did you come here?
1971.
What brought you here?
Well, I had friends who, one of my best friends in high school, and his older brother was also a good friend, had vacationed up here, and they were working at a place called the Moby Dick Inn. And I had read an article, you might have seen it, it was in the National Geographic that year. When I was 15, it was time to kind of make some money. And I was mowing lawns and
15?
Yeah, I was like mowing lawns and stuff in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And,
I remember those days.
So I basically got a ride to Hartford, Connecticut with one of my friend's mothers.
At what age?
15.
You came here at 15?
And I
by yourself?
Yeah, I hitchhiked from Hartford, Connecticut to Falmouth. And
your parents just let you go?
They didn't know. they thought I got a ride the whole way.
But you were staying in Hartford.
Yeah, my friend's mother was driving him to Hartford for some reason. So
you went to Hartford and then hitchhiked to here?
Yeah.
I see.
And I remember I came over on the, I guess it must have been the Nobska from Woods Hole.
Right.
And I stayed the night before at some place. I still remember it was the Nautilus Motor Lodge, or hotel or something. I don't know if it's still there or not. And I'll never forget, I got here, and I was pretty nervous. I mean, it's my first time really away from home.
Oh yeah, with being so young.
And I remember somebody told me where to go, up to the corner of Orange Street in Maine, and stick out your thumb. And I remember that this family, it was classics. It was like something out of a family movie or something. It was an old station wagon full of kids, and they had just obviously just arrived here. It must have been the start of August. The August people were here. Mm-hmm. So some lady was driving it, probably from Connecticut or whatever. And I got in the back seat, and she drove me out to the Rotary and said, "Go that way, it's Wisconsin." So I stuck out my thumb, and I still remember this old, must have been a Nantucket native, really kind of distinguished looking guy with really thick white hair, dark suntan, white t-shirt. I think he must have been a gardener, not a landscaper, a gardener. Picked me up and took me up to Wisconsin, and I remember coming over the rise there on Main Street in Wisconsin and saying to myself, this beats the hell out of Baltimore.
So beautiful, isn't it? It always blows you away.
Yeah,
when you do that.
It's such an
really
unbelievable street. Yeah. And so
isn't that funny?
I went and stayed at the Moby Dick for a couple of weeks.
Moby Dick is where now?
That's the summer house now.
That is the summer house.
But back then it was in really nice condition, and they owned all the cottages. And so it was a great. The following year I visited for a little bit longer and washed dishes for John Krebs at the Ship's Inn.
Yeah.
And then in 1973, after I graduated from high school, I became the lifeguard at the Moby Dick pool. And that was my first full-time job up here.
Did you have long hair? Were you like a hippie kid?
I characterize my style as more like a long-haired preppy kid.
Oh, I see.
The thing, everybody had wore faded Lacoste shirts, had shoulder-length hair, and those painter's pants.
Oh, right.
Everybody used to wear those.
That's true.
And topsiders.
And topsiders, exactly.
The topsiders that were actually made in, I guess it's Naugatuck, Rhode Island, or Naugatuck, Connecticut.
Why did you choose to stay? You have always lived in Wisconsin, or have you?
I've stayed other places at times. But Wisconsin's always funny. I was telling someone the other day. after I graduated from college, I was working from the finance department in Baltimore City, which is like the furthest thing from what I should have been doing, and I just hated it. I was playing club lacrosse, and I was coaching lacrosse in Baltimore.
Okay.
And I came, and I did that for about 5 years, and then playing post college lacrosse was, they didn't have pros, so it was all the college players played in these club leagues, and it was great lacrosse. It was really fun. But I came up here that summer and worked at the Moby Dick again. That was the last year before it was sold, or maybe the second to last year. And I happened to be walking up Broadway one day, and I was always fascinated with Old Lang Syne. I mean, even then, I was a photographer. You might know that.
Yeah.
And one still, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'd always photographed Old Lang Syne, which is the 1675 fishing cottage, and I was fascinated with it, and I look in the yard, and there's this woman that I barely knew. Her name was Ozzy, who I went to college with. And if I hadn't turned up the street that day, my life might be entirely different. So I talked to her, and she said, "Oh, I've been renting this place. You want to look at it?" So I went inside and took some pictures, and she said, "I'm leaving tomorrow. Do you want the owner's name and phone number?" This is like the beginning of September, 1978. So
were you planning on staying?
No. So I called up the owner, who was this eccentric little Japanese lady who lived in D.C. She had inherited the house from her boss/boyfriend. So anyway, she rented it to me for $45 a week. And I had to send her a money order every week and write her a little note about how the hollyhocks were doing in the front yard. And I did that for 10 years.
And same price?
9 years. Well, she passed away after like my 6th year there, and her nephew inherited it. And they kept renting it to me, and it was great. I mean, that's...
You'll have to show, we'll drive around.
Okay, sure, yeah.
Which house it is.
I mean, it's a famous house.
Have you been married?
No.
Always confirmed bachelor like Bill Maher?
No. I mean, I've had a couple of long-time girlfriends.
Yeah, right.
The funny thing is, I think when I was in my real target get married years, which is like, your 20s and early 30s, when everybody's moving to the suburbs and buying their first house and having kids and whatnot. You
feel pressured almost to.
Yeah, and I was living out here working as a kind of a carpenter and doing the slideshow with Carrie Hazelgrove, and I wasn't really making any money, so I wasn't exactly what you would call a catch.
Oh yeah,
so
that must be tough though, to live here and not be a catch. I mean, it doesn't it seem that way to you now?
It's funny the way people look at stuff out here now, because it's become such a playground of the. I mean, they used to call it a millionaire's playground. Now,
well, this hasn't changed that much.
But now it's a billionaire's playground. Wisconsin hasn't changed that much.
No, it hasn't.
The difference now in Wisconsin is that it used to be July, either whether you rented or owned, it was July people or August people or summer people. In other words, almost everybody here came year after year, either for the whole summer or for one of those months. If they owned, maybe they rented it 1 month, and then Dad commuted back and forth on the weekends to Connecticut or New York or what have you. And I've noticed in recent years that now it tends to be there's more turnover, and a lot more people are here now and don't use their houses all the time in the summer.
Right.
Especially the newer houses, they seem to sit empty a lot.
So you mean back in the 70s, a lot more people lived out here then?
It was more consistently full occupancy. Now there weren't as many houses, but everybody was here. If you sat at the Rotary, any time of day, really in the 70s, there were 1 million kids on bicycles. There weren't that many automobiles, and there were virtually no new cars. If you saw a new car, it was a big deal. Now it's
Oh, I know.
If
you don't have a new car, there's something wrong with it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
I don't know how you put up with it, but you do, and you've actually made somewhat of a living from your knowledge of being here for as long, right? You do tours of this place?
I just started it, and I did it last summer, kind of part-time, to see what it would be like. I take people around and talk about the history of the village, and it's really fascinating. I mean, as long as I've lived here, I'm still learning new things all the time.
Oh, I'm sure. And so you're always adding to it.
Yeah. I mean, I'll do things like show old restaurant.
Didn't you say that this place originally was a fishing ground for the Native Americans?
Yeah, there were Native Americans fishing here, 5,000 years ago, and that was before Nantucket was an island, by the way. It became an island 3,000 years ago, or so they said, around
Okay,
that.
all right, well,
and
the Ice Age, right?
But this was always really, really productive fishing offshore here, and also drift whaling. The Native Americans apparently would, and this is just stuff I read from Nat Philbrook's books and whatnot.
Okay, sure.
But they would process the dead whales and make bone implements and whatnot right out here. And so when the English got here, I think it was 1653, it didn't take them long to come out here and realized, because they had to eat something, so this was the place to fish. And this was before they came up with the idea of industrial whaling.
And Codfish Park,
Codfish
the name,
Park.
this where we are,
this was all
named because of the amount of codfish
exactly.
that were
And this area was basically, up until the 1870s or so, was frequently washed over. Okay, during winter storms.
It really was?
Yeah, and so there was the houses, those structures that were down here prior to the 1860s were basically disposable structures so that the fishermen could store their boats and whatnot.
Right.
That's
why they've maintained their size. They're very small because
right. Most of these are all new.
Yeah.
These were built probably in the 1920s and 30s.
Right.
There's a few that are older that are still here, and then in the 1870s. Wisconsin had really begun to take off. There was a lot of land speculation after the decline of whaling, and there was you've heard of the Underhill cottages. The Underhill was a kind of a philosopher, eccentric, intellectual guy, and he had some money, and he bought property on the south side of Wisconsin and built what's essentially a kind of a quirky reproduction of the old primitive village of Wisconsin.
Where's the south side of Wisconsin?
Behind the summer house. And
this is dangerous.
Yeah. Well, no,
it was dangerous.
In terms of flooding.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny, in 1992 there was a whole nother row of houses that got wiped away in one weekend storm.
Right.
And in '93, I remember, I think it was this house here at Bell. It was a nice little house. The owner approached me. At the time I had a house on
this one here.
No, the little one there.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe I
lived out here for a little while.
It's the one down here.
Yeah.
It used to belong to Billy Hunter, I think. But anyway, maybe it was Tommy Kennelly owned it. Anyway,
what are the? Yeah, go ahead, finish that point.
The guy that owned it approached me and wanted to know if I wanted to trade my house, which was much less valuable, for this house because he was so afraid that it was going to get washed away.
Well, you couldn't get rid of these at one time.
This house here, Gino.
Yeah.
This was Mrs. Ayer's candy store and hot dog stand.
Oh, it was.
It is currently for sale.
It's for sale now?
Yeah, it's under $1 million, but it's not much under.
Oh, come on.
It's 8 something. Yeah.
It's 800,000.
Cute little. Well, it's a pied-à-terre in Wisconsin.
Well, 800,000 is for some people. That's
you would spend.
That's a deal.
It's a deal, and you would spend that much to buy a condo in the city without thinking twice about it.
Right now, you can walk to
this tiny little place here.
That little thing right there?
Yeah, it belongs to my friend Jackie, and she's a nice lady. She tells me her grandmother, I think it was, lived in there year-round with her husband and 7 children. That was during the Depression.
Wow. That looks like a railroad, like it's been remade or something.
That was kind of a typical, I think, Codfish Park
That's
style
nice to
house.
see those, isn't it?
Yeah, and this wasn't. I think Codfish Park wasn't really land courted completely until it may have even been the 80s, but it was a long.
They got, like you've heard the stories, where you could throw a bucket in here and pull out cod. That's not necessarily true.
I'm sure. Back then they probably had sturgeon and maybe even salmon around here. You never know. But
there were that many fish.
Oh yeah, it was. All of it. Well, there was a rule passed at some point during the Puritan era that you couldn't forbidding you from using striped bass for fertilizer, and that was the first conservation movement because there were so many fish, people would literally use them for fertilizer.
Unreal.
The Native Americans used to take a fish, or a part of a fish anyway, and put it in a hole with a corn kernel seed, and smooth the dirt over it, and that would be the fertilizer to start the corn. Yeah.
That's terrific. Now, when you do your tours, do they meet you in one place? Do you walk all over the village?
Yeah.
Pretty much?
Yeah.
How long does it take?
Well, I was taking it was a little too long to start, and as you can tell, I get a little carried away. So
no, we love it. I find it so interesting.
I'm trying to make it about an hour because
I'm going to go this way.
Okay. Are you filming outside the vehicle right now, or no?
Yeah.
Oh, you are.
Yeah.
Because we can drive through the Actors Colony.
Yeah, I want to know about that.
Go down here to the left.
Okay. These are incredible.
Now this was a hotel.
The ocean.